Good morning, everyone. Welcome to our webinar on Paycheck Protection Flexibility and the updates to the PPP. It's a hot topic, I know, and we have a real expert on the line with us today, who I'll introduce shortly. I want to remind everyone on the line that we have a help desk for all of you that if you need help, called Business Link. You do not need to be a member of the partnership to take advantage of this service, but essentially, if you're having trouble figuring something out or you just have a burning question you want answered, please reach out to us and we will get we will help you. So without further ado, I just want to say we're going to have a great presentation from Steve Turner from Bonadeo Group. And there will be time for questions, I'm confident. So use the question and answer function. If you see a question that's being similar to the one you'd like to ask, like it, that will move that question up. In the event that we do run out of time, we will get to the most burning questions for all of you. The final thing I'll say is that this has been a really tumultuous time, and I know how challenging it has been for many of you, and appreciate your willingness to trust us to guide you through it. And I'm really happy to be in a position to talk about some good news for a change, which is the extension of the PPP and the changes that should make this much easier for all of you to take advantage of the program. So let me introduce today's presenter. Steve Turner is a principal at the Bonadeo Group. He is following this very closely, and he's put together an incredibly concise presentation, which all of you will get, by the way, link to this recording after the session is over as well. So Steve, welcome, and I'm going to turn the presentation over to you to get started. Are you there, Steve?
I am. Thanks, Patty.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Morning, everyone. Thanks for starting out the presentation with the picture of baby Steve on there. I should probably get a new picture, and as I'm sure all of you on the call this morning, with all the business concerns that you've been dealing with and all the PPP changes, I'm sure that these changes, rapid changes, have led to the rest of my hair falling out, so that's awesome too. So thanks for joining us this morning. For any of you that were joined us last Thursday for kind of a little broader discussion about PPP, Main Street lending, and some of the tax law changes, as you were aware, the night before I gave that presentation, this Flexibility Act moved through the House, kind of unexpectedly, kind of quietly, as I had been in discussion with some of my clients. I didn't personally think it was going to make it through unchanged the way that it did. And that's a great thing for business owners on the line too, because it really is, it's a pretty sweet deal. So Seth, if you could move to our overview slide. As I mentioned, let's see, about 8 days ago, last Wednesday evening, this bill passed through the House. And then on Friday, June 5th, the president signed this act into law, the Paycheck Protection Program Flexibility Act of 2020. And it created significant changes to the PPP in a very positive way for business owners. It's definitely, as the name suggests, creating more flexibility, giving more leeway in how you can spend down that money so that it benefits you and your business the most. But as I did last time, and as I'll probably have to do with anything that we talk about PPP until we're well beyond it, there's many areas of this act, of this Flexibility Act, that require further clarification. There's already a number of areas that changes are anticipated due to unintended effects. And there's also areas of question that remain where it's just general uncertainty, like what is the process? And I'll speak a little bit to that as I go along. Seth, next slide, please. All right, so as Dottie mentioned, I tried to keep this presentation concise in chart format so we could talk through this and then leave this open for questions for anyone that has any more specific or even general questions that we can answer here. So first big change, as most of you are probably aware, is under the original law, you had 8 weeks from your PPP loan disbursement to spend down your money, the covered period. Now, under this modification, now you'll have 24 weeks from the date of your PPP loan disbursement, or December 31st of 2020, the end of the calendar year, whichever is earlier. A couple comments about this as we move through here. You will have the ability to elect to still utilize the 8-week period, and I guess some personal opinion on this. I think that this act was very important because when this was first passed, when the PPP program first went through in the CARES Act, I think that many of the people I've talked with had a more optimistic timeline of recovery. And 8 weeks, June 30th, it didn't seem that crazy at the time. Now, of course, in the world that we're in today in June, there's so many industries that cannot see the light at the end of the tunnel still. The fortunate part is that help has arrived in the form of Flexibility Act. The unfortunate part is that in some ways, I feel it's too late for many businesses. Some businesses made decisions along the way to strategically spend down and structure their spend down in an 8-week period. The tough part there is some of that may have included hazard pay, bonus pay. It may have included a business plan that involved bringing employees back really earlier than you would have if you did have a 24-week period. So it's a welcome reprieve. In some ways, I feel that although the most impactful change of all of this, in my opinion, it's a little late for some businesses. The second change on here is the requirement for the utilization of the PPP funds. In the original law, a minimum of 75% of your qualifying forgivable spend had to be on payroll costs. And that's salary, wages, the bonuses I mentioned, hazard pay, and all of that is subject to an annualized threshold. Plus, in that payroll category is retirement benefits, group health benefits. Now, in the interest of giving business owners some additional leeway here, a minimum, it's been dropped to a minimum of 60% that must be spent on payroll costs. So interesting piece here, as it's currently written, it's a hard target, meaning it's an all or none. 60% must. But as we've already seen in less than a week here, there's been plenty of conversation from a number of different governing bodies, other authorities that have stated that that wasn't the intent. It's still meant to be this soft reduction target like the 75% was, not a hard all or none target. So we're waiting for further clarification on this 60% threshold here. The next thing that got changed in the Flexibility Act is business owners have been given more time to restore their full-time equivalent employees or their salary reductions that are in place. Old or original law by June 30th, restored on or before June 30th. Flexibility Act on or by December 31st, 2020. There's still some conversation that's occurring with this, the wording specifically on this. There's a little bit of uncertainty as to the interpretation of on or before here, meaning I think some of the worry that business owners have is, look, I've kind of game planned to hit the 8-week PPP loan disbursement target, and now if I go to 24 weeks, I don't feel confident or comfortable that I'm going to be able to maintain headcount in this. And that's a real business concern too, especially if we're talking about the end of the year towards December. I think that concern represents some broader economic concern for sure. And I think that a current interpretation of this includes focusing on this on or before, meaning not at June 30th or at December 31st, but if you kind of get up and touch the top line, the 100% line, and you make it there before then you may be able to, you should be able to not see a reduction based on your restoration of FTE employees. So that's a positive, that's a pretty positive interpretation of it. I think that where confusion still exists and where confusion will continue to exist until we receive even further clarification. In the instructions and guidance, you have situations that read on or before. In the currently existing application for forgiveness, it has you report your employment level at June 30th, which is interesting because it doesn't really jive if you think about the instructions and the wording to what they're having you report. Why June 30th specifically on there? So as with all of this, and as I mentioned in the beginning, the big question here is, what is this going to look like from where we are now to incorporating all of these updates to the PPP? And the answer, which isn't a great answer, or the answer everyone wants, is we don't know. We don't know at this time. We don't know if the application itself will be changed. We don't know if there will be 2 applications. We don't know even some more specific questions in some of these. How early can you apply for forgiveness? If you go to 24 weeks and you hit your full spend down in week 10 and you've already hit your FTE restoration, can you apply then? And there's not clarity around that issue right now. So it's certainly a hurry up and wait situation with this, as so much of this, of the CARES Act has been. Next slide, please, Seth. All right, another change in the original law as was written, there was a 6-month deferral period on payments starting with the date of the loan. In the revision, it's been modified to be the deferral period is the earlier of the earlier of the date that the forgiveness application is submitted, or 10 months after the last day of the covered period if an application is not submitted. So if you take no action, if you either never got to spend it down or you for some reason aren't applying for forgiveness, you'd be able to let it run out. You would get 10 months after the end of your 24-week period, and that's your deferral in that range. I'm going to jump around on this slide just a little here to link this up with the bottom point on here, which is a point about loan maturity. The loan maturity in the original law was a 2-year loan, 1%. The 1% has not changed. The change with the Flexibility Act is that now the loan maturity date is a 5-year term. And that's for loans that originated on or after the enactment of the Flexibility Act. But I want to make a point that there is the possibility, there exists language that there's a possibility that existing PPP loans, ones that were obtained in April, in May already, could go back to their lender and renegotiate that loan maturity timeline. And I don't think that it's going to be a heavy lift on that. I think that most lenders are really going to want to work with you on that and do whatever they need to do to kind of shift you over to the 5-year period. Before I go to the next point in the middle, I think this is a good spot to kind of talk about one thing that currently has not changed, and that's the application deadline. So as of right now, as of today, the application deadline remains June 30th, 2020. And I think it's interesting to me as someone who's followed this pretty closely from day one. It's interesting to me that that date hasn't changed. One, it's interesting the date hasn't changed. Two, it's interesting that there's still money left, because in the very first round, if everyone recalls, the funds were run through pretty quickly. And I don't remember exactly. I think it might have been 10 days, or it was a short period of time. And it was a hot topic of very closely monitoring the loans that have been made and how much money was remaining. And then this program received additional funding, and there's still money available, which is a great thing, because in combination with the Flexibility Act, there is a real opportunity for some continued long-lasting impact of this thing. So if anyone on the line or listening to this, or if you talk to anyone, I think it's an important message to get out that, look, there's still money available. There's still money available under this program, and now more than at any point since the passage of the CARES Act, it really has some fantastically favorable terms. So let's talk about the FICA tax deferral on here. So the employer side payroll taxes, which represent 6.2% of gross payroll. Under the original law, employers were able to defer their payment of this, and this is done through the mechanism of your payroll tax return, quarterly payroll tax return. You were able to defer the payment of those taxes from the period of March 27th, 2020, which is when the CARES Act was passed, through the date of PPP loan forgiveness. So if we think about this in terms of an older example, or an example under the original law, you have, let's say you got a loan on April 27th. So you're deferring for a month right off the bat, deferring your payroll taxes, and you had 8 weeks, so 2 months worth of payroll in that time frame. And then let's just say another 30 days on the back end for the process of applying and being approved for loan forgiveness. So if my on-the-fly math is accurate here, we're talking a total of 4 months of available deferral under that example. And we're talking about, for a business that maybe has $100,000 in payroll, it would represent approximately 6,000 times 4 months, 24 grand. Nothing that's breaking the bank for sure, but it's a gimme. It's a free one. So I would recommend that to any of the clients that I work with. I recommend, why not? Under the Flexibility Act, the change has been made where now employers, regardless of PPP loan forgiveness in here, are able to defer payment of these employer-side payroll taxes from the period of March 27th through December 31st. So using my made-up example, let's think about it. So old way, 4 months, 6 grand a month for if you have payroll of 100 grand, obviously multiply this up exponentially or down, depending on where your business lies. So old example, 4 months times 6 grand, $24,000 benefit. New example, 9 months, April through the end of December. So 9 times 4 there, 36 grand, or I'm sorry, 9 times 6 rather, $54,000. So it's more than double the benefit under the old opportunity. So you could be talking some real tangible dollars for bigger businesses, and for smaller businesses, that smaller dollar level still can very much have a substantial impact. And I would tell you, to those businesses that I speak with that say, don't want to do it, don't care, don't want to think about it. I understand from an administrative perspective, as you can see on the slide, and this hasn't changed, half of that money that you deferred would be due at the end of 2021, and the other 50% at the end of 2022. No interest, zero interest. If you have any debts, line of credit, excuse me, any other interest-bearing debt, it's an automatic return. Free up the capital, put it against that interest-bearing debt, and save that for the rainy day or any of this as we kind of continue to work our way out of the pandemic. So I think it's a light lift. Contact your payroll provider to kind of flip the switch on this thing. It's a light lift. It's behind the scenes. Just do it. It's an easy one, in my opinion. Next slide, please, Si. So the last two things I'm going to kind of talk about before we go to some Q&A is these two safe harbor modifications. So the first one kind of expands on the concept, which was a later concept. I think it was originally put through in the FAQ document, which was like I think it's at like 48 FAQs for the old PPP. And that's a lot of really like clarifying governing information in there too, when combined with the text of the law and the interim reg updates and stuff like that from the SBA. The safe harbor here speaks to FTE reductions that a business may have encountered where they couldn't hire their people back. They tried, you can see here, documenting good faith, the inability to rehire individuals, either who were employees on 2/15/20 pre-COVID-19 pandemic, or the inability to hire a replacement, a similarly qualified employee for any unfilled positions by the end of the year. The key here, and I know I mentioned it last week for anyone who was on the call then, but the key is the documentation piece here. And I think that as with so many different phases of the CARES Act, but most specifically the PPP, documentation super important. There's safe harbors that we talk about, the $2 million safe harbor where you're presumed to have made the need certification in good faith. Still a great idea to have documentation, full documentation on your eligibility for the loan. This is another area where it's not a sweep it under the rug thing. Make sure you have both from an HR perspective and from a PPP documentation perspective, everything in a row, everything lined up to document that you were unable to fill those positions, maybe a posting, something like that. The second item on here has to do, as you can see, it's a safe harbor that has to do with employee availability or more specifically business activity that has been restricted due to compliance with CDC, OSHA, or HHS, Health and Human Services guidelines. So the way I think about this one is, as you can see here as it reads, you won't be penalized for reductions in FTEs if the borrower can document in good faith an inability to return to the same level of business activity as they were at pre-COVID-19. So as it says at the bottom here, think about social distancing. Think about new requirements and sustained requirements and restrictions around nursing home capacity, around hospital capacity perhaps. Think about something different completely. Entertainment venues. No one, at a bare minimum in the Western New York region, will be attending large concerts this year. And those are businesses too, and they're really dramatically affected by these restrictions of no gatherings larger than or social distancing guidelines. They will not be able to return to the same level of business activity as they were at before 2/15/20. So I think that's a pretty succinct update on all these modifications. Before we go into questions, I think what I'd like to conclude with is these points, these changes, think about the timeline and the rough road of, okay, CARES Act 327, boom, here we are. PPP buried within. And then you have weeks and months of clarification. Well, I don't think we're going to be in that months range of clarification. We are living right now in the environment where this is all out there. You as a business owner are tasked with making business operations decisions based on this information, which is still unclear. It's a tough spot to be in. The best thing you can do is position in the least risky way, the safest interpretation of the currently, as it's written, act as you can, and seek out guidance from your trusted advisor wherever, whenever you can on this stuff. So Dottie, if we want to kind of go into some Q&A.
You bet. We've got a few questions. So, and just a reminder, if you go into the list of questions and one looks similar to the one you want to ask, just like it, and then I'll move it up the list. So let's get started. We've got a good amount of time here for Q&A. So the first question is, can I verify that we can now use 10 or 12 weeks of payroll instead of 8 weeks, and must maintain the average FTEs of those 10 to 12 weeks?
It's a good question. Good question, which we could use some more clarification on. I can give you the information as we currently understand it, and I'm just going to pop this back open here. So yes, you are correct that you can surpass the 8-week timeline to spend down. So yeah, you could enter the 10 to 12 week range of payroll instead of the 8 weeks. To do that, you would take no action at this time because there's no action available to be taken. We don't know what the mechanism is right now or the process to be able to elect the 8-week to keep the old way. Your question about maintaining the average FTEs of those 10 to 12 weeks, good question. More clarification needed, but I can tell you that based on the shifting of the safe harbor from June 30th to 12/31, and just kind of using some more straight math on this, if you had to get your average back to 100%, it means that you had to at some point in there return to 100% FTE levels on or before old June 30th, new 12/31. So I would tell you that although we don't have all the answers on this right now to answer this question, you should be okay. And keep in mind that the intent of this Flexibility Act was to create flexibility and to make it easier for business owners to spend this money down, not harder. But the application as it stands right now really only focuses on the 8-week period. So it's going to be, let's see what happens with it.
Okay, excellent. Thanks, Steve. Jim Farmer and 4 others would like to know, they've been making their FICA deposits to date. Can I stop paying my share now until the end of the year? Can I go back to March 27th?
Sure. So the best answer I can give you to that one is that my understanding is that you should be able to retroactively go back. Jim Farmer and other upvoters, I would tell you, make a call to your payroll provider today. It shouldn't be a heavy lift to make this change, and they would be the ones, assuming that they're the ones preparing and filing your quarterly payroll tax returns. That is the process by which you receive credit and thereby deferral for those deposits.
Excellent. Melissa Colas and 3 others want to know, if FTEs were reduced due to resignations and not terminations, and we chose not to fill those positions, is there a penalty in the forgiveness?
So as it stands right now, sorry, I'm just shifting over to that question so I can stare at it as I'm speaking to it here. So due to resignations and not terminations. So if, as it stands currently, there's some leeway in here to, as long as it's documented, if you have an employee resign, if you have an employee resign and you choose not to fill it, that's an interesting question. I would say, doing some interpretation of this question, if you're choosing not to fill it because it's a business decision, a reduction in business levels, you should be okay with full documentation, I think. It's kind of a facts and circumstances situation here with this.
But Steve, can I ask you a question to clarify that? Because
Sure.
what you said earlier in the guidance is the reduction in staff based on the CDC or government sort of regulations on your business. So in the 50% occupancy. So if someone says, well, I just don't want to replace that position, I want to get my costs down, you know, do you think they have the same level of protection under the PPP?
I don't think they have the same level of protection in a sliding scale sense. I think that, you know, to Melissa's question, not knowing what industry we're talking about, there's plenty of industries that probably could make a case that they fall under that safe harbor. That being said, there are plenty of industries that for sure don't fall under that, whether they be essential or otherwise. So I would tell anyone asking that question that in a sliding scale sense, no, I don't believe you would have the same level of assurance with that specific fact pattern compared to the safe harbor CDC or distancing regulation guideline.
Okay. What's the interest rate on what is not forgiven? I've heard it's 18%, not exactly low.
1%.
1%.
That hasn't changed. Yep. So it's still, the only thing that's changed is before it was 2 years, 1%. Now it's 5 years, 1%.
Okay. The method to calculate FTEs is based on hours paid. How does shared work, the shared work program, affect those calculations? And if they stop their program by December 31st, would forgiveness be protected? So just a question around how shared work programs impact FTE calculations for the purpose of the PPP.
So to kind of define the shared work thought pattern here, make sure I understand what's being asked as well. Reduction, if you have a full-time employee 5 days a week, 8 hours a week, and you shift them to they're going to be a 3-day-a-week employee times 8 hours, and they would be partially eligible for unemployment. And through the end of July, they'd be eligible for, through the end of July as it stands right now in this ever-changing environment, they would be available for enhanced federal unemployment, which is the $600 on top of the $600 on top of that. How would it impact it? Your head count, you are correct, is based on hours. It's based on a 40-hour FTE equivalent calculation. So if you previously, in the reference period, hadn't utilized the shared work program, you could have a situation where full forgiveness may be affected, not protected, as the question reads. So there is some risk there, and I would tell you that if you haven't already implemented your shared work program, there may be some strategy available there to either hold it off and do that after you've spent down this money. If you've already implemented your shared work program, I think there's some strategy available to you to be able to make some changes to make sure that you're sitting a little more in that protected forgiveness category.
Okay, great. I can't pronounce this name, but I'll read the question. We have not reduced our workforce. Our covered period is from 4/22 to 6/21, 8 weeks. Can I use the 8-week period and apply for the forgiveness, or would it be more beneficial to wait and use the 24 weeks so that I can include the qualified non-payroll expenses for the 24-week period instead of the 8 weeks?
Thorough question, but easy answer, luckily on this one. So I would tell you two things. One, can you still use the 8-week period? Yes, you can. Can you move to a period, the 24-week period? Yes, you can. would it be beneficial? The question that I would have to ask you is, if you have already spent all your money on qualifying expenses and you calculate out that you would be eligible for 100% forgiveness using the 8-week covered period, then there's probably no reason or benefit to utilize that 24-week period. Now, when you say non-payroll costs, qualified non-payroll expenses, I'm going to assume that because you asked that part of the question, that you have not spent all your funds. In that case, yes, I would say, based on this question, if you still have money left over, the amount of your loan, no one's loan amount is changing. It's just the parameters as to how you send it and how it's forgiven. So in this case, I would tell you, yeah, you might want to explore utilizing that 24-week period, because it sounds like for your specific circumstance, the 60-40 sliding scale versus 75-25 possibly may work into that time frame. But I would also say, and I'm really reading into this question, Dottie, but if you haven't reduced your workforce, then I would tell you, all things equal, then I would kind of expect that you would have spent all of it down. So the non-payroll costs, non-payroll expenses rather, I don't know. You should definitely explore using the 24-week period to be able to spend the rest of that money.
Okay, excellent. This is Eric is asking a question. Eric Jefferson is asking a question that reminds me of one of these SAT questions where you had to keep all the math in your head. So okay, are you ready? All right, here we go.
Let's try.
Okay, let's say we had 100 employees prior to 2/15/20 pre-COVID. Our staff was reduced to 60 on March 31st. We received our loan on May 1st. We spent over 60% on payroll over the next 8 to 24 weeks. As of June 30th, our FTE count is 80 due to cost cutting. So they went from, let's say 100 to 60 to 80. So that's not going further down. There's some recovery there. And it will remain at 80 through the rest of the year. Is our forgiveness ratio 80% or 0? I'm not exactly sure if I understand the question, but do you understand the question, Steve?
I sort of follow here. So
okay.
There's a couple pieces, and there's a couple pieces in this that I'm going to try to explain and thereby answer the hypothetical. It's always such a dangerous question when it begins, let's say this. So if you received your money on 5/1, and I'm not looking at a calendar to do this, so let's just say the end of your covered period, 8 weeks, coincides with June 30th. It's probably not exactly that, but which is also the old safe harbor date. You have two things. One, if you're speaking about using the next 8 to 24 weeks, so I'm going to say that you didn't spend it down entirely in there, in that range, and would your forgiveness, if you were making it back to 80, my other assumption here is that your average probably isn't 80, first of all. It's probably something that included a ramp up between 60 and 80. So would you be limited to that lower average? Possibly. And I would tell you another thing, that the 6/30 date, if you only touched as high as 80 out of 100 employees, you never returned for the use of that safe harbor. You never touched that top line of 100 back to 100 employees at any point in there. So I would tell you, it sounds like you wouldn't qualify for the safe harbor piece, but your average calculation, which would be what I think you're referencing here with the 80%, that it wouldn't stick there necessarily. It would factor in a bigger piece. But I would tell you, you have available to you some other options. Why did you only go back to 80 out of 100? Was it because of any of the safe harbor restrictions? Did you have anybody that didn't want to return to work? And you can document that. So you have some outs here, but it sounds like you might require a little more planning to kind of project out and see what would be the most beneficial to reach that. Hopefully I kind of answered that best I could live here.
That's great. Listen, we've got another 12 questions, which I don't think we'll get through in our remaining time. So I would
Sure.
just ask listeners to go through and vote for the questions that you think you want to hear the answers to. And I will say that any unanswered questions, Seth on our team will make sure that we get answers to your questions, but they just won't be part of the broadcast. So Pam wants to know, if you choose the 8 weeks, am I entitled to the other changes such as 60% of payroll?
Yes, I believe that's our current interpretation of that currently.
Okay, great. Neil wants to know, for the FICA deferral loan, is that guaranteed by government, or are the directors and officers liable for that?
So it's not a loan, Neil, to be clear. It's just deferring payroll taxes. I would tell you that, is it guaranteed? I don't know the answer to that, but that's a good question, and you should rightfully be concerned about your obligations if you choose to defer under that program too. So there is some, I guess you could view it as some potential risk there. You need to do some planning to make sure that you have the funds available to pay that deferral. But it's not a loan, and I don't know the answer to those deferred funds being guaranteed.
Okay, great. Yeah, that sounds like a question for a lawyer, actually. So to calculate the FTE number, do you just take the number of hours paid during the week and divide by 40 hours? We have some workers who work variable hours, so we just want to be sure this calculation makes sense.
Yep. So in a week that you had an employee work, so let's just say that I'm going to use an 8-week covered period. It's just easier to explain. In an 8-week covered period, you had someone that works 20, 40, 30, 10, 5, whatever it is. Add it up, divide by 8 weeks, divide by 40. That's going to give you effectively a percentage, a decimal that represents their FTE, full-time equivalency, full-time equivalent. So if you add all that up and you get to a 0.7, they're a 0.7. There's also a practical expedient to use a 1.0 or a 0.5, but you kind of have it right where divide by 40.
So this is another question about the calculation. Wages to non-residents, H-2A workers, do they count as wages, count for the FTA base number and the number for forgiveness?
Jim has some good questions today. I'm going to say that my interpretation of it is that those wages should not count into those wages, or that head count should not count either in the reference period or for the forgiveness. So it's U.S. residents, and if I'm interpreting your question correctly, these are wages paid to U.S. residents. So if you have a non-U.S. resident on your payroll, they should be excluded on both the reference period and your covered period.
So is there a deadline to apply for forgiveness?
Good question. Don't know at this point. Don't know. That's a fair question. There's, like I mentioned in the presentation portion with the chart, there's if you do nothing, after 10 months, your loan ends after 10 months after the extended covered period, your loan ends its deferral period. I don't know if that's a hint towards how long can you wait sort of thing, but it's a situation that we're closely monitoring. It's fluid. We need more information.
If we reach our full FTE with week 26, then it declines. Are we okay with just using week 26, or does the FTE count need to be maintained?
Further clarification would be helpful here for this calculation, but our current interpretation is that if you touch that line on or before, based on the wording, you should be able to, well, I think you said week 26 in there, did it say?
I think so, yes.
So just to, maybe it's a typo, but we're
Wait a minute,
talking
hold on a
24
second.
within
24 weeks, yes.
it's 24, okay. So yeah, if you hit it within your 24 and you decline again, there's currently no restrictions on maintaining that count. So should be okay. Keep an eye out for further updates.
This is an interesting question. We have self-insured unemployment. We also have implemented the shared work plan. New guidance came from the DOL that 50% will be covered, credited, and the shared plan participants are credited at 100%. Is the 50% remaining covered as an expense for PPP?
I'm going to use my get out of jail card on this one and say, Debbie, I would be happy to follow up with you offline on that one.
Okay. I'm trying to look because we've had some people ask a lot of questions. I'm trying to get the questions that for someone who hasn't asked one yet. Lynn wants to know, for an independent contractor who was previously limited to the 8/52 calculation for loan forgiveness, will this amount increase based on the 24/52 weeks?
No, don't think so. So
Yeah.
in the same sense of, Lynn, the loan for that independent contract, it's really the way that your loan is calculated, and the loan amounts are not being recalculated.
Don Lorenz is asking, do you see any chance of the PPP being modified to accept he means 501c6 organizations anytime before June 31st? This is really a political question more than an accounting question. Do you have an answer? See, I can throw something in here, but can you, do you have an answer?
I don't have an answer as to my expectations because, I'm just wrong so often. But there's plenty of this issue, and there's plenty of other issues that have like a current lobbying force behind them for good reasons, but I'm gonna pass on that one.
I'll just tell you what we've sort of heard, Don, is that the next stimulus package, if there is one, isn't going to be even talked about until July. So if they do add and we're impacted by this, the partnership as well. So I would assume that if they do agree to put the 501c6s in, they'll have to modify the deadline for that. But we're not counting on it for that reason. So thank you for bringing up the question. All right, let me just double check here where I saw a few votes come in. I just want to make sure we haven't. Okay, we're still good. Okay, Kurt Amico wants to know, if I'm using the 8-week period and need to do a furlough a month later after June 30th for 2 weeks for 3 people, is that okay?
Should be okay.
Okay. These questions are jumping around. I apologize for my delay here. I'm sorry, Steve.
No problem.
If a borrower uses less than the 60% for payroll, is there a partial forgiveness or none of the loan will be forgiven?
So this is a provision within the Flexibility Act that has already had the alarm sounded on it and needs updating to it. So it's as it's written, yeah, it's more hard-nosed or hard-lined on the 60% all or none, but that wasn't the intent. So we anticipate modification or clarification to that specific provision. So I think, me with the disclaimer opinion to it, I think that you should be fine with the same soft requirement of 60%.
Bill wants to know, can we apply for forgiveness after 12 weeks, or rather, should we wait until the 24 weeks ends?
Good question. Don't know. And I say don't know because we don't know what the new process is. I would tell you to contact your lender to ask that question because you're going to be applying through your lender for forgiveness, but they don't know either because it's what we're waiting on.
Yeah, more guidance. Yeah, that's the recurring theme as you know, it's a double-edged sword because we can't criticize the government for, you know, not getting it all figured out because they're moving quickly,
Hmm.
but it does create a sense of frustration when people want to do the right thing here. So the last question we're going to have today is from Melissa, and she wants to know, if we choose to use the 24 weeks instead of 8, can we include payroll costs for the full 24 weeks?
That's yes, you can. That's the kind of the whole basis of this thing, is it gives you extends the covered period out so you can chew up all of your loan and approach 100% or very near 100% forgiveness. And that was the main intent of this.
But Steve, just to clarify, because I read this question a little differently, the amount that you're going to qualify for has not changed. In other words, it's not payroll cost for 24 weeks. It's based on a different calculation.
Correct. And if I read that incorrectly, my apologies. So the loan amount and thereby the forgivable amount isn't changing. It's just a window of qualifying expenses that you can use to approach 100% forgiveness.
Excellent. Great. Well, this has been literally a game of 20 questions. So thank you so much, Steve, for getting them done and getting them done within the time. So to all of you who have stuck with us for this entire hour, thank you. Good luck, and we'll keep you posted as guidance comes out. If you're not currently receiving our business updates, because we do try to, as guidance comes out, let people know what's going on. Please reach out to us, and we'll make sure that you'll get on those lists. So thank you again, Steve. And Jim Farmer just wants to make a comment, not a question. Thank you. This was the best. So I can't say it any better than Mr. Farmer. So thanks, Steve, and
Thanks, everyone.
Hope to see you in person sometime soon. Take care.
Take care, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.